What if everything you believed was a lie? A murderer confessing, but not everything. What did he hide until the very last hour? These are questions that make your skin crawl, that pierce your mind with an almost unbearable uneasiness. Have you ever felt the weight of someone's condemned last words? That mixture of regret and secret that seems to carry more than simple remorse. A secret that can change everything, that can rewrite the history you know. Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to discover may change your view of guilt, justice, and what it really means to ask for forgiveness. We are about to enter the dark mind of a criminal who for years lied to everyone, to the police, to the justice system, to himself. A lie built on bones, blood, and silence. But at the last minute, something changed. Something that made him reveal the truth that no one expected. Imagine the scene. The cold cell. The lights that never go out. The overwhelming feeling of isolation. It was in this suffocating environment that he decided to speak. Not a simple plea for forgiveness, but a confession that carried an unbearable weight. A secret buried under layers of falsehood. A crime hidden within the very crime for which he had already been convicted. What could drive someone to hide a new truth until the last moment? What would you do if you were in his place? This final confession is not just a twist in the case. It is a dive into the deepest criminal psychology, where fear, guilt, and manipulation intertwine in sinister ways. And it is precisely this complexity that makes the story all the more disturbing. You will understand how a man, marked by trauma and disastrous choices, built his life around lies so dense that they almost swallowed reality. Have you ever experienced something that made you hide a crucial truth? What fear kept you from revealing? What you really know? What happens when conscience hits too hard, when silence becomes unbearable? These questions pull us into this story, forcing us to face not only the killer, but the human shadow that lives within us all. The prison system. Investigations and trials are the stage for a psychological duel where every word carries weight, where every silence can be a trap. And when this new confession reaches the authorities, everything changes. The hunt for the truth begins again, the trial becomes even darker, and the public is divided between believing in redemption or seeing yet another calculated act by a manipulator. But what really lies behind this latest confession? A genuine regret? A desperate strategy? Or a sinister warning that the darkness he carries is greater than anyone could have imagined? What you will discover now may surprise you and leave deep scars. Stay with me, because the truth he revealed is only the beginning. What comes next challenges everything you think about justice and evil. The last word, the last breath, was not an end. It was an opening to an even more disturbing mystery. Don't turn away. The story is far from over. What you hear next could change everything forever. The cell was cold, almost freezing. The air seemed heavier than usual, as if each breath carried the density of years of silence and secrets buried deep within a troubled soul. The damp and cracked walls seemed to absorb every sound, every sigh, amplifying the emptiness around them. It was a place where time slipped away slowly, and loneliness was a sentence worse than any formal conviction. It was in this suffocating setting that he waited, sitting on a metal chair, his eyes fixed on a point that seemed too far away to be reached. When the door creaked and the agent entered, the mood changed. The noise echoed like a thunderclap in the almost sepulchral silence of the prison. That moment froze in time. The harsh light coming from the ceiling illuminated the face marked by time and mistakes. There was something different about that expression, a vulnerability that few had seen before. The voice came out low, almost a trembling whisper, loaded with an emotion that seemed ready to explode but which was still trying to contain itself. "I lied all along," he began, the sentence sounding like a confession, but at the same time like a warning. The weight of the words spread throughout the small room, hitting those listening with the force of a punch to the stomach. A request for forgiveness that was not just for those who were there, but for the entire world that had judged, hated, and condemned him. It was as if in that moment he was tearing off an invisible mask, exposing a raw and painful truth. But the confession didn't stop there. Between pauses filled with pain, he revealed something that no one could have imagined. A hidden crime. A shadow within the very darkness for which he was already paying. The revelation came like a bolt of lightning. The agent, accustomed to hearing horror stories, felt the tension grow almost palpable. Each word was a sharp knife, cutting through the heavy air of the room, shattering certainties and opening fissures in a narrative that had been constructed for years. The strong smell of ink from the pen used to record the statement seemed to permeate the air, mixed with the cold sweat that slowly dripped down the man's forehead. The sound of the pen scratching the paper was the only noise that broke the silence, making the moment even more solemn, almost ritualistic. It was a complete surrender, a journey behind the scenes of a disturbed mind, where regret and manipulation danced on a fine line. The trembling voice filled with contained emotion made any doubt about the sincerity of that moment disappear, at least for a moment. It was the culmination of a mental journey that had consumed him from within, the point at which the truth, no matter how painful, could no longer remain hidden. This confession was not just about a crime, but about the devastating impact of decisions that shape human destiny. Each word spoken seemed to tear the veil of lies that time, fear, and the will to survive had woven. The environment, so hostile and cold, took on an almost surreal aura. The contrast between the brutality of the space and the fragility of that moment was impossible to ignore. It was like watching a silent transformation, where a man for a few seconds seemed to take off all the armor built to protect himself from the world, a raw and naked exposure of the hidden truth he had been carrying for years. The eyes, normally hard and cold, now reflected a sea of internal conflicts, guilt, fear, regret, perhaps even hope. It was such an intense combination that anyone present felt the weight of that revelation on their own skin. That moment was the materialization of the tortuous journey of the criminal mind, where the struggle between good and evil is not clear, but obscure and full of nuances. And as he spoke, revealing every detail, the tension grew. The silence that followed his words created an almost unbearable pressure, as if the atmosphere itself were waiting for the next bomb he would drop. It was a mind game, a macabre dance between the fear of the truth and the desperate desire for freedom, even if that freedom was simply the acceptance of the inevitable. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this moment of confession is much more than simply giving away secrets. It's a turning point, an instant that reveals not only what happened, but who was really behind the lies. The mental transformation that occurs at this moment is essential to understanding the complexity of criminal psychology and the real impact that a hidden truth can cause. This is where the behind-the-scenes investigation begins, the silent and relentless work of those who seek to uncover what has been hidden beneath layers of manipulation and pain. Every word spoken in this cold cell carries an emotional charge that reverberates far beyond the prison walls. It opens doors to new questions, new discoveries, and most importantly, to a deeper understanding of the human mind in its rawest and most challenging form. This final confession, full of revelations, is not just another chapter in an already complex case. It is the key to understanding the criminal's transformation, his hidden decisions, and the reasons that led him to remain silent for so long. It is the door to a world where the truth is dangerous territory, where every step can trigger unpredictable consequences. Whether it was the pain that overwhelmed him, the search for redemption, or a final impulse of conscience, that moment in the cell is a brutal portrait of human complexity, a moment that forces us to look within and question not only the criminal, but the very nature of error, guilt, and forgiveness. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. I want to know what you think about this internal struggle, about the power that one last truth can have in changing everything that already seemed written. This immersion into the criminal's mind in this fragile and revealing moment does not happen by chance. It is the result of a collective effort, of an incessant search to understand what moves the shadows within the human being. And it is precisely this connection between those who investigate, those who listen, and those who feel that makes this content so unique. If this subject resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most in this story. What feeling or question remained within you after this heartbreaking confession? Your participation is what fuels this dark and intense conversation. What makes this channel grow, reach more people, and keep alive the commitment to bring the darkest truths, those that few have the courage to face. Liking and commenting is not just a simple gesture. It is a bond of reciprocity that strengthens this community of restless minds and restless hearts, all on the same journey for answers that no one dares to say out loud. When you sign up here, you are opening the door to an ongoing experience, to deep dives into stories that challenge thought and provoke a necessary discomfort, the discomfort of truth. It is this support that allows us to continue uncovering these cases, bringing details that are often hidden, revealing the behind the scenes of the minds that walk the fine line between the human and the monstrous. Therefore, this is not just a call to sign up. It is an invitation to be part of something bigger, of an incessant search for knowledge and understanding that can change the way you see the world and yourself. That moment, where fear and courage collide, where silence breaks to give way to the ultimate truth, is the point that leads us to question everything we thought was right. It is the open door to the next secrets that are yet to be revealed, to the shadows that are yet to emerge, and to the echoes of a mind that insists on hiding its last cards. Now, while this confession still echoes, I want to go even deeper into this matter. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because understanding who this man really was is like opening a door to the darkest corners of the human mind, corners where trauma, loneliness, and decision-making mingle in a dangerous dance. To unravel what motivated this confession and the plea for forgiveness that shook the foundations of everything we believed in until then, we need to look back at the origins of this disturbed mind. Criminal psychology does not simply offer a portrait of the criminal. It reveals the internal journey that led him to the abyss, where the lines between victim and perpetrator blur. Born in a neighborhood forgotten by time, he had a childhood marked by abandonment, not just physical but emotional, the kind that silently eats away at the soul. Studies indicate that more than 70% of serial killers suffered some kind of severe trauma during their childhood, from abuse to the absence of stable parental figures. This was no different. The abandonment became the root, and the open wounds, the seeds for a distorted mentality, where the world became a hostile place and justice something he needed to take into his own hands. The transformation of this pain into violence did not happen overnight. It was a gradual, cruel process, where each decision reinforced the cycle of hatred and loneliness. But there was something else, a psychological factor that complicated the picture even further. His inability to deal with guilt and the repression of emotions that made him, in the eyes of the law and science, unpredictable and dangerous. This man was not just a murderer, he was a prisoner of his own mind, a reflection of the dark underbelly that criminal psychology tries to map in order to understand the essence of evil. He showed clear signs of dissociative disorder, a defense mechanism that made him divide his identity between who he was, what he wanted to be, and the monster he tried to hide, until the moment of his final confession. But the psychological complexities only add to the mystery because despite all this, he managed to manipulate the truth until the last moment. He lied to investigators, to the victims' families, to himself. And why is that? Because deep down, each lie was a desperate attempt to control the narrative of her own life, to transform its impact into a version that could still be supported by her fragile mindset. It's a stark lesson in how the power of decisions and choices can be lost in the darkness of the mind, and how the hidden truth can be even more disturbing than the crimes themselves. Experts who have studied the case have pointed out that his psychological transformation has involved intense cycles of self-destruction and self-deception, a tortuous path that rarely ends in redemption. His journey shows how invisible wounds can become silent beasts within someone, shaping behaviors that defy logic and arouse fear. It is an internal battle that no one sees, a psychological war that goes far beyond what appears in the courts or in the media. And while the confession seemed to bring a breath of hope, that plea for forgiveness that seemed sincere, almost human, There was a huge weight, a truth hidden between the lines. The trembling voice sought not only absolution, but also a final act of control, to reveal a crime that no one expected, a twist that changes the perception of everything that came before. This is not just a confession, it is a silent revolution in the story of a man who refused to be just a monster. He wanted to be understood, or at least remembered. And it is at this point that the questions multiply. What is the real impact of this revelation? How does this latest truth change the mindset of those following the case? What decisions along this tortuous path could have been different? Criminal psychology offers us tools to analyze, but not always to understand. The truth, after all, is a complicated territory, full of layers and shadows that never completely dissipate. This journey through the profile of this killer is more than a study. It is a dive behind the scenes of what human beings can carry within themselves. A narrative where the weight of choices, the impact of trauma, and the search for redemption intertwine in a scenario as real as it is disturbing. An invitation to question not only what we know about the crime, but what we don't know about the mind that committed it. Comment below. This makes sense to me. I want to know what you're feeling on this journey through these dark layers. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the weight of the lies he carried is a shadow that runs through the entire story, a dark veil that covers the real truth for years on end. What seemed to be a definitive confession, a closure, was in fact the tip of an iceberg that held dark secrets, conflicting versions, and a web of deception so well crafted that for a long time it confused even the most experienced investigators. The mind that chose the crime also chose lies as an ally, a facade built not only to protect himself from justice, but to control what the world knew about him, about the monster that everyone sought to understand. From the beginning, the versions contradicted each other. Words were mixed up, details didn't add up, deafening silences only added to the mystery. It was as if each account had been designed to cast doubt, discredit witnesses, and divert attention from the truth. The construction of this facade was not a simple act. It was a careful operation, a true architecture of lies that mixed fragments of reality with fiction to create a scenario where confusion reigned and the truth seemed unattainable. And this strategy didn't just serve to deceive others. At some point, it served to deceive himself. The impact of this manipulation is greater than one might imagine. Each lie that was superseded by the truth changed the course of the investigations, delayed justice, and created a layer of controversy that to this day fuels heated debates. Who was really to blame? The man behind the confession or the character he built? To what extent can a lie protect or destroy a soul? These are questions that echo without a clear answer, because criminal psychology teaches us that lying is not just hiding facts. It is an extension of the mind trying to survive, creating narratives to escape emptiness or overwhelming guilt. Behind these lies, there was also fear. Fear of being completely revealed, of facing the naked truth, of admitting one's inner demons. And it is this tension between the need to confess and the impulse to hide that makes the story so dense, so charged with psychological tension. The lie, in this case, is not just a mistake or a detail. It is a central piece of the puzzle, a mystery in itself that calls into question everything that was believed to be certain. These conflicting versions created a cascade effect, where each new piece of information seemed to open up more questions than it answered. Even those involved in the investigation began to suspect, do we really know the monster, or just the character he chose to portray? The controversy has arisen because when the line between truth and lies is so thin, the impact goes far beyond the crime itself. It touches on our own ability to understand human nature, the complexity of the decisions that lead someone to hide their true face. This journey behind the scenes of lies also reveals how the hidden truth can be a powerful weapon, capable of manipulating not only public perception, but also the fate of one life and many others who have been indirectly affected by this story. The weight of these falsehoods is a burden that few can bear, and it only increases the tension surrounding this final confession that seemed to carry the promise of redemption. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. I want to know how you see this dark game between truth and lies. because understanding this behind the scenes is essential to decipher the real impact of this story. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the moment when everything changed is not just a point in time, but a rupture in the very essence of that man. An instant where the weight of the past, of lies, of choices made in the dark, collided with something unexpected. The awakening of a conscience that seemed dormant. Buried under layers of denial and self-preservation, what led this criminal to abandon, even for a brief moment, his armor of falsehoods? What made his voice waver, his mind waver between silence and confession? Was it remorse, the real fear of death, or perhaps a last desperate attempt to seek redemption before everything was lost forever? It's hard to say for sure, because these motivations are as complex as the human mind itself. But what we do know is that, at that moment, the words took on a different weight, an almost palpable urgency. It was no longer just a well-told story, full of half-truths and omissions. It was a story filled with raw, almost visceral pain that seemed to pulse with a hidden truth. The silence that had previously dominated gave way to a broken, hesitant voice, as if each word were a dangerous step on a tightrope between salvation and damnation. This awakening of consciousness forces us to look at the darker side of human transformation. How can someone carry the burden of deceit, guilt, and violence for so long, and suddenly find themselves at a mental crossroads where the only possible way out seems to be to stare into one's own abyss? The mindset that once closed in on self-protection and denial is now shattered, revealing fissures that expose deep fears, belated regrets, and a desperate search for meaning, even if it means facing one's own destruction. This is where decisions take on an almost philosophical dimension. What is harder, living with the eternal lie or facing the truth no matter how painful it may be? How many secrets remain buried, ready to emerge only when consciousness can no longer bear the weight of silence? And what does this awakening tell us about human nature? Is there a fine line between monster and man? A rare window where transformation is possible even in the final moments? The revelations of that moment were not just personal. They had a profound impact on the entire journey, shaking up the investigation and public perception of the case. What seemed definitive gained layers of complexity, opening space for new interpretations and a debate that would never be easily resolved. The criminal who chose to confess, even if belatedly, was not the same one who had built the labyrinth of lies. He was someone who in his final act may have sought something beyond fear, a spark of humanity. This point in the story makes us reflect on the impact of our own choices, on how the hidden truth can be both a prison and a key to liberation. What leads a person to confront themselves after so many years of living in denial? What is the price of this transformation, and what does it reveal about the fragility of the human mind in the face of despair? The journey we begin to unravel here is not just that of a killer. It is that of any human being who faces their inner demons and finds themselves at the crossroads of continuing to run away or finally facing what they have always tried to hide. Comment below. That makes sense to me. I want to know how you deal with this struggle between the shadow and the light within each of us, because understanding this complexity is essential to continue unraveling the true roots of this story. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this story hides a layer that few have dared to explore. A crime within the crime, a shadow that hides behind what already seemed definitive. The new confession revealed something so disturbing that it reconfigured the entire investigation, a hidden truth that only he could unravel, a secret that had been sleeping silently for years, waiting for the right moment to emerge. A second crime, a forgotten victim, a mystery buried deep beneath what we knew. It is no exaggeration to say that this revelation placed a new weight on the entire narrative, a weight that until then had seemed impossible to bear. Imagine the scene, the man who was already condemned on the verge of execution, bringing back to life a story that refused to die. The confession came cold, without hesitation, like a sharp blow against the silence that hung over that case. He not only admitted to the first murder, the one that had already destroyed the reputation of his existence, but he revealed that there was more, much more, something that had never been discovered. A victim that the system, investigators, and even the public forgot about, or maybe they never knew it existed. This new facet of the crime not only increased the horror, but also exposed the flaws, loopholes, and backstage of an investigation that seemed closed, but in fact never was. The revelation raised a disturbing question. How can someone commit a crime within a crime, creating a maze of violence that challenges even the best minds in criminology? This confession was not just an admission of guilt. It was a challenge to the official truth, a provocation that shook the foundations of what everyone believed to be the end of that story. The mentality that guided that man changed radically, as if he had finally decided to expose everything, revealing a subtle strategy that kept the chaos under control, a precise manipulation between silence and lies. The impact of this new information spread quickly. What was once a linear story with a beginning, middle, and end became a plot of almost unbearable complexity, where every detail needed to be revisited. The backstage of the investigation was opened up to re-examinations, interviews reviewed, testimonies questioned. Each step of this journey became a search for the hidden truth, as if the second crime were the key to understanding what really happened, and perhaps to revealing a side of the killer that until then had remained hidden in the shadows. This new confession also reveals the gap between what justice sees and what the truth can hide. How many victims remain forgotten in cases like this? How many stories are buried along with the lies? This leads us to reflect on the system, on the fragility of the decisions that shape destinies, and on the responsibility of those who investigate and judge. The killer who once seemed like an isolated figure now appears as the epicenter of an earthquake that shook everything around him. And it is at this point that we understand the real weight of the impact of the decisions, the lies, and the truths that only he could reveal. When we unearth this second crime, we are not just faced with another victim. We are faced with a transformation in the way we see the entire narrative, a change in perspective that shakes the mental structure of those who follow this story. Revelations like these shake our confidence in what we think we know and force us to face the human complexity that lives beyond the headlines and sentences. It is the moment when the crime ceases to be just an isolated act and becomes a central piece in a machine of secrets, choices, and consequences. The criminal's mentality, previously calculating and cold, becomes vulnerable, revealing that behind that facade there was a fragmented mind, which used lies to hide not one, but two horrors. The impact of this moment reverberates like an earthquake in the narrative, changing everything that seemed established. It is as if the killer, in his final move, had decided to pull back the curtain to show the backstage of the macabre spectacle he helped to create. The hidden truth, now exposed, defies any simplistic conclusion and leaves questions in the air that cut deep. What motivated the second crime? Who was this forgotten victim? What secrets were buried with her? And most disturbingly, what is the limit between what he confessed and what still remains in the shadows, invisible to everyone? Comment below. I'm on this journey too. I want to know what you think about this new face of crime and how the revelation of a secret can change the entire perception we have of a story. Because understanding these behind-the-scenes stories is essential to delve even deeper into the next revelations. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened next changed the course of this story forever. When the authorities received that new confession, the one that revealed the second crime buried in the shadows, an almost instantaneous reaction took over the backstage of justice. The coldness of the facts was interrupted by a rare frenzy, a race against time to find what had been hidden under layers of silence and neglect. It was the beginning of a hunt for the truth that no one could have foreseen. The date was already marked in the history of the investigation. March 14, 2017, when the São Paulo Police Department officially reopened the case. Amid a whirlwind of questions that kept arising, the impact of that revelation was like an earthquake that shook not only the police station responsible, but also public opinion. It was no longer an isolated crime. It was no longer a suspect behind bars. It was a hidden truth that exposed flaws in the original investigation, exposing the fragility of the methods used and the possible negligence of those who were supposed to protect justice. The Homicide Division, until then convinced that the case was closed, had to swallow its pride and go back to digging into every detail, as if each step revealed an even deeper layer of secrets, lies, and manipulations. The atmosphere was one of growing tension. What had been hidden? Who benefited from the silence? Rediscovering the old evidence brought a disturbing sensation. The reality that had seemed so clear now appeared hazy, full of gaps and inconsistencies. The investigation teams revisited the crime scene, a house in the Kambushi neighborhood where the first victim had been found. The scene, which had previously seemed definitive, now took on new contours and new meanings. The experts, using more advanced equipment than was used at the time, searched for traces that could point to this second victim. What they found shook up the foundations of what was known. Fragments that indicated the presence of someone else, traces that had been ignored or misinterpreted. Each discovery generated more questions than answers. The reopened investigation was moving through the dark corridors of justice, between archived documents and testimonies that seemed contradictory. The police called old and new witnesses, people who, until then, had remained silent or had been silenced by fear and time. The pressure on the investigators increased every day, with the media demanding answers and the public demanding justice for a forgotten victim. The dates piled up: April 28th, May 15th, June 22nd, 2017. Each one marked by small twists and turns in the case, reconstructions of the crime, and the desperate effort to put together a timeline that would finally fit all the pieces of this macabre puzzle together. The hunt for the truth became a real race against omission and forgetfulness. The police had to face their own incompetence and possible internal collusion that may have prevented the discovery of the second crime for years. Each document, each record, was a testament to the struggle between hiding and revealing, between the past that insists on returning and the need for an outcome that would bring justice. The behind the scenes of this investigation reveals a silent battle, a war of egos, interests, and secrets that was not restricted to the criminal, but extended to the institutions that should guarantee the truth. It was a profound transformation, which affected the mindset of everyone involved: investigators, prosecutors, judges, and also those who followed the story from a distance. The journey to find the truth was no longer just about pointing fingers, but about rescuing a narrative that had been mutilated, about giving voice to those who had been forgotten. This search highlighted how the system can fail, how human decisions within it can hide more than they reveal, and the brutal impact this has on victims and families. The confession that brought this second crime to light not only changed the fate of the accused, but also the fate of that trial and of the entire truth that still needed to be unearthed. It opened the doors to a bigger question. How many other cases carry buried secrets camouflaged between the pages of the investigations and the walls of the courts? How many lives remain invisible while we only judge what is exposed? What's more, how can a single decision trigger a chain of events that forever change the course of an investigation and public perception? The reactions spread. In the public sphere, doubt took over. How was it possible that a second crime could go unnoticed for so long? In the corridors of justice, pressure for transparency grew. An internal process was opened to investigate possible flaws, and experts were called in to evaluate the procedures initially adopted. The case gained even more momentum when, on August 10, 2017, the prosecutor's office announced the opening of a new investigation to investigate the circumstances of this hidden crime, which generated a series of heated debates about the effectiveness of the criminal justice system and the true priorities of the institutions. Now faced with this scenario, the mindset of those who follow this story changes. It is no longer about watching a criminal confess his final sins, but about understanding the complexity of the truth, the layers it carries, and the impact that each revelation has on the perception of justice. The journey to unravel what has been hidden requires courage to face discomfort, to challenge what we believe to be true, and to accept that transformation is not always linear or comfortable. It is a process that touches the essence of what it means to seek justice and understand human nature. Comment below. This makes sense to me. I want to know how you see this relentless search for a truth that has been buried, and what this struggle says about ourselves and the world we have created to judge right and wrong. Because the story is far from over, and the next revelations promise to shake the foundations of this hidden truth even further. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the trial that followed was a crossroads between justice and farce, a macabre dance where every movement carried the weight of decisions that could change everything or nothing. The courtroom, with its cold walls and rigid chairs, became the stage for an invisible conflict, where the truth seemed to be an elusive ghost, sometimes illuminated, sometimes hidden in the shadows of doubt. The bright lights could not erase the gloom that hung over the case, that last confession that reappeared like a stone thrown into a still lake, sending ripples of unease and controversy. The legal proceedings, which began in October 2017, did not follow a linear path. The defense sought to deconstruct each argument, question each piece of evidence, and cast a thick cloud over the credibility of the witnesses and the evidence that now included a crime that many believed had been forgotten. On the other side, the public prosecutor's office relied on the strength of the new confession and the reopening of the investigations, trying to piece together a puzzle that would make sense to the court and to the increasingly polarized public opinion. The atmosphere was tense, with each hearing taking on the contours of a battle, full of veiled accusations, calculated strategies, and deafening silences. Public opinion, in turn, was sharply divided. Groups organized on social media advocated an acquittal, pointing out flaws in the process, possible manipulations, and even conspiring about alleged judicial persecution. Others called for a severe sentence, interpreting the final confession as a cry of guilt that could not be ignored. The streets and timelines became arenas where the truth was disputed in comments, hashtags, and inflammatory videos, reflecting the impact that this trial had beyond the walls of the court. In the midst of all this, the accused remained silent for much of the process, allowing his final words to carry the weight of a deafening silence. The controversies were not limited to the public sphere or the polarization of social media. In court, questions arose about the work of the original expert, which some experts described as hasty or incomplete. New forensic analyses presented by the defense raised legitimate doubts, bringing to light the possibility of errors that could have compromised the result from the beginning. The specialized press, accustomed to dissecting complex cases, did not hold back on criticizing the procedures adopted, creating an aura of doubt that hung over the final decision. It was a duel between science, justice, and public perception, with each element trying to claim its own version of the truth. The weight of the latest confession in court was a mix of mystery and threat. On the one hand, it seemed to be the key to unraveling a web that until then had seemed impenetrable. On the other, it created a knot of contradictions that were difficult to unravel. The defense argued that the confession was the result of desperation, of the pressure of the imminent maximum sentence, an attempt to manipulate the system in search of some benefit, even if illusory. The public prosecutor's office, however, maintained that there was no room for doubt when the accused himself detailed, in great detail, the hidden crime, a victim who until then had no name, face, or right to memory. It was a struggle between versions, a silent war in which the scales of justice seemed to tip towards uncertainty. Over the next few months, the courtroom became a microcosm of the battle between what we know and what remains hidden. The trial was marked by testimonies that left more questions than answers, witnesses who contradicted each other, and a growing tension that filled each session with an almost palpable atmosphere of suspense and fear. The defense, supported by experienced lawyers, did not hesitate to exploit any loophole to discredit the narrative presented. The public prosecutor's office, in turn, fought to maintain the coherence and strength of the case, knowing that the future of that story and that man's life hung on the tightrope of the judicial decision. The transformation that trial represented went far beyond the individual fate of the defendant. It was a change in the way the system viewed complex cases, a questioning of decisions made in the heat of the moment, and the impact that a convicted person's final word can have on the search for the truth. The mindset of those observing from The outside, and even those within the process, changes radically in the face of the uncertainty that is established. It is proof that justice is a battlefield full of gray areas, where truth is often a fragile construction, shaped by human decisions and interpretations that can fail. In that court, the trial also became a mirror of society, reflecting the fear, doubt, need for justice, and distrust that permeates every layer of the system. Each statement, each document presented, each dramatic pause was an invitation to delve behind the scenes of a battle that went far beyond what the cameras could capture. The emotional impact for everyone involved was immense, a mixture of hope and despair, certainty and doubt, which left in the air the feeling that this story was far from having a definitive end. What was being discussed there was not only whether a man was guilty or innocent of the second crime revealed, but whether the very concept of justice could survive this storm of doubts and contradictions. It was a trial that tested not only the evidence but the system's ability to recognize its own errors and adapt to the complexity of human nature. Each decision there reverberated beyond the walls of the courtroom, shaking public perception and the trust placed in institutions that promise to guarantee truth and justice. Now, faced with this immense emotional and intellectual burden, what remains is to face the difficult decisions that need to be made, not only by the court, but by all of us who observe this fight so close and so far at the same time. The weight of the final words, of the final confessions, resonates like an echo that challenges our certainties and forces us to face the stark reality of what it means to judge someone when what is at stake is more than just a life. It is the very credibility of the system. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. I want to hear what you think about this fine line between justice and farce, and how this battle can change the way we see what is truth and what is illusion. Because the story continues and what comes next is even more disturbing. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the silence of prison is not just the absence of sound. It is a stifled scream that reverberates off the cold, dark walls, a heavy echo that penetrates the mind and soul of those who know there is no going back. The condemned man, that man who once ignited debates and divided opinions, now lives in absolute solitude, imprisoned not only in his cell, but in a mental labyrinth where the final confession has transformed everything and nothing at the same time. That moment when the truth was told, or perhaps revealed, did not bring relief. It brought an almost unbearable weight, as if each word spoken had torn away a part of him, leaving a dark, silent void that stretches for days, months, perhaps years. The psychological impact of this confession is a tortuous journey through the mind of a man who faces not only physical punishment, but the internal torment of his own conscience. It is not just the expectation of the final sentence or what fate may have in store, but the daily coexistence with the consequences of that last act of truth, or despair. Prison, with its confined space and constant surveillance, seems to amplify thoughts, transforming silence into an almost palpable presence. The absence of external voices forces the condemned man to face invisible ghosts, sharp memories, and the painful sensation of being completely isolated, both from the world and from himself. Each day within these walls is a cruel confrontation with the past that cannot be erased, with the decision that changed everything. The final confession has become a permanent shadow, a ghost that whispers all the time, feeding doubts, regrets, and fears. Loneliness becomes a prison within a prison, where the condemned cannot escape his own internal judgment. He is no longer just the defendant before a court. He is the prisoner of his own mind, trapped in a web of thoughts that intertwine, with the deafening silence around him. This new reality is a brutal test of your mental strength. The nights, long and cold, are marked by a tireless vigil, where the seconds drag on and the mind finds no rest. Time seems to lose its meaning, and the condemned man finds himself trapped in an endless cycle of memories and reflections that slowly wear him down. It is in this heavy silence that he experiences the true dimension of what he has revealed, the magnitude of his confession that not only opened a new chapter, but rewrote his own story. The transformation is profound, not only in his life but in the impact his decision had on everyone who followed the case. At the same time, outside, expectations are growing. Those watching eagerly await the unfolding of events that this confession has set in motion, wondering what developments are yet to come. The tension is not just inside the courtroom or in the mind of the convicted. It spreads like a thick fog, touching family members, victims, lawyers, journalists, and the public who found themselves caught up in a web of revelations and twists. Each day that passes increases the feeling that something is yet to be revealed, that the silence of the prison holds secrets that have not yet been completely revealed. The confession, although spoken, did not erase the mystery. On the contrary, it deepened the enigma. It brought about a transformation not only in the case but in the mindset of all involved. The hidden truth emerged from the shadows, but its exact outline remains blurred, demanding more investigation, more reflection, more courage to face what really lies behind those words. The impact of this revelation is a force that changes perceptions, shakes beliefs, and challenges the comfort of easy certainties. While the condemned man struggles with his own demons in prison, the outside world prepares for the next decisions, for the moment when justice will have to confront not only the cold letter of the law, but the emotional, ethical, and human complexities that have arisen along with the confession. The journey that began the moment the last word was spoken is still far from over, and what appears to be silence may, in fact, be the harbinger of an unseen storm. This pause, this space filled with tension and emotion, is an invitation to look beyond the obvious, to understand the behind the scenes of a process that is not limited to facts and evidence, but to the human essence, to the internal struggle that occurs when a man is forced to face his mistakes, his fears, his hidden truths. It is a silent but brutal battle that reveals the fragility and strength of the human mind in the face of the harshest reality. Comment below. This makes sense to me. I want to know if you've ever felt this invisible pressure, this weight of silence that speaks louder than any words. Because this story is far from over. What comes next is even more disturbing. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because what seems closed, what should be buried in the silence of prison, still holds secrets that few dare to reveal. What no one knows is that behind that final confession, there is an even denser shadow. A hidden fragment of the truth that escapes the eyes of justice and the public. A dark piece of history that could change everything. Perception, judgment, even the very line between guilt and innocence. The confession, though powerful, was not complete. There are gaps, uncomfortable silences that pulsed louder than the words themselves. These gaps are fertile ground for doubts that grow silently. People close to the convicted man whisper about inconsistencies, about meetings that no one recorded, about deleted messages and versions that change with the wind. Public opinion, already divided, begins to fragment even further. Some believe that justice was served. Others swear that there was manipulation, pressure, and shady interests acting behind the scenes. The hidden truth that hangs in the air turns the case into a game of shadows where each piece seems out of place. Each revelation hides a bigger and darker one. It is this feeling that we are facing something bigger, more complex, that makes the mind work at high voltage. The impact of the confession and the trial is not just in the moment. It reverberates like a tremor that shakes structures, destabilizes certainties, and causes a profound transformation in the way we see justice and the human being behind the crime. The decisions made in that court echo far beyond the walls, influencing trajectories, destinies, lives that can no longer go back to the way they were. But what no one knows yet is that this final confession, so shocking, may be just the tip of the iceberg. There are reports, hidden documents, information that has never come to light which indicate that the true motive for the crime, or the real identity of whoever was behind it, may be being masked. Conspiracy theories intertwine with facts, creating a tangle where it is difficult to separate what is true from what is manipulation. It is a silent war, an invisible battle between conflicting versions, where the line between hero and villain becomes increasingly tenuous. The mentality of the condemned man, his internal transformation, the emotional impact of the last confession, all of this serves as a curtain for a much larger plot, which involves obscure interests and decisions that go beyond the legal to the moral realm. At the heart of this story is the weight of the hidden truth, that secret that can change the course of everything and that few have the courage to face. And it is exactly at this point that the journey becomes more intense, more charged with tension and disturbing revelations. The promise is not simple. What comes after this last confession is even more disturbing. Revelations that challenge our understanding, that make us question everything we thought we knew about the case, about justice, and about human beings. The silence of the prison, the psychological impact, the final confession, all this is just the beginning of a story that unfolds in multiple layers, each one darker than the last. If you want to understand the darkest side of the human mind, the decisions that shape destinies, the hidden truths that challenge justice and morality, leave your comment. The truth only begins here, right there. I'm on this journey too. If you've come this far, it means you're really looking to understand the deeper side of this story, the nuances that escape you at first glance. This space is for those who want more than easy answers, for those who aren't afraid to face the shadows behind the truth. So if this content made sense to you, if it connected with what you're looking for, leave a simple sentence in the comments. I'm with you until the end. It will be our silent pact on this journey that still has a lot to reveal. And since we're building this connection, if the video brought something worthwhile to your mind and concerns, leave a like. No pressure, just a gesture that shows that this conversation makes sense. This helps us to continue bringing more of these stories that don't fit in the headlines, that require courage to be heard. There is a video here that complements this subject, which goes into even more detail that you will want to know. Click and stay with me there because this journey is far from over, and what comes next may be even more unexpected.